My name is Sophia Carter, and I'm 29 years old. I always thought that love and trust were the foundation of a family. I believed that marrying Ethan was the beginning of a beautiful life filled with dreams, stability, and unconditional support. But that trust was shattered, and it all started with one piece of paper. It was a crisp Friday afternoon, and I came home early from work, hoping to surprise Ethan with dinner. I carried a bag of groceries in one hand and my keys in the other, smiling at the thought of his reaction to my homemade lasagna, his favorite. But as I stepped onto the porch, my heart sank. There was an envelope taped to the door. I frowned, setting the groceries down to pull it off. My name was written on the front in bold letters, but inside was a cold, formal eviction notice. The words blurred as I read them over and over, hoping I was misunderstanding. You are hereby notified to vacate the premises within 30 days. I stumbled inside, the paper trembling in my hands. Ethan. I called, my voice shaking. What is this? What's going on? No answer. The house was eerily quiet, and it felt like the walls were closing in. I dropped my bag on the kitchen counter and sat down, clutching the letter. My mind raced. How could we be evicted? This was our house. We had saved for years to afford the down payment. Every corner of this house held memories, movie nights in the living room, mornings in the sunlit kitchen, late-night talks on the porch. The front door creaked open, and Ethan walked in, looking surprised to see me. You're home early, he said casually, but his smile faded when he saw the paper in my hand. Ethan, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. What is this? His expression turned guarded. Sophia, just calm down. Calm down. I snapped, slamming the paper on the table. How are we being evicted from our own home? What is going on? Ethan sighed and ran a hand through his hair. It's complicated. Complicated. I felt my chest tighten. This house is in your parents' name. You said it was just a formality. You said it was temporary. It was, he muttered, not meeting my eyes. But, my parents decided to sell it. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Sell it? Without telling me. It's their house, Sophia, he said, his tone defensive now. They needed the money, and I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. Their house. Ethan, this was supposed to be our home. How could you let this happen? They didn't have a choice, he shot back, his voice rising. They were in a financial bind, and they did what they had to do. I stared at him, my mind reeling. And you didn't think I deserved to know? You didn't think it was important to tell me that the house we live in, our home, was being sold out from under us? Ethan looked away, his silence saying more than words ever could. My chest felt like it was being crushed. I had trusted him. I had trusted his parents. And now, that trust was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The words on the eviction notice replayed in my head like a broken record. My home, my sanctuary, was gone, sold by people I trusted without a single warning. Ethan tried to justify it, but his explanation sounded hollow, like excuses for betrayal. The next morning, I woke up with a knot in my stomach. I couldn't just sit there and let them take everything from me. I needed answers. So, I called Vivian. Her cheerful voice came through the phone as if nothing had happened. Sophia, darling. How are you? How am I? I said, gripping the phone tightly. Vivian, I found an eviction notice on my door yesterday. Care to explain? There was a pause, and then she sighed dramatically. Sophia, I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but Greg and I had no choice. We needed the money for some unexpected expenses. Unexpected expenses. I repeated, my voice shaking. You mean more vacations and spa days? That's not fair, Sophia, she said sharply. We've always done what's best for the family. You wouldn't understand. I wouldn't understand. I felt a surge of anger rise in my chest. You took the house I've been paying for, the house I trusted you with, and sold it without even telling me. How is that what's best for the family? It's not your house, she snapped. Legally, it's ours. You signed it over, remember? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. She was right, I had signed the papers. But I had done it under the belief that it was temporary, that it was to protect our assets, as she had so kindly put it. Now, that trust had been weaponized against me. I trusted you, I said, my voice breaking. I trusted all of you. Trust is a two-way street, Sophia, she said, her tone cold. Maybe next time, think about the bigger picture before you get so emotional. The line went dead, leaving me holding the phone with tears streaming down my face. I found Ethan in the living room, sipping coffee like nothing was wrong. His calmness made my blood boil. You talked to your parents? He asked, barely glancing up. I did, I said, crossing my arms. And they made it very clear that you were part of this decision. Ethan sighed, setting his mug down. Sophia, it's done. There's no point in fighting about it now. No point. I shouted, my voice trembling. Ethan, this isn't just some minor mistake. You sold our home without telling me. Do you even care about what you've done to me? Don't make this a bigger deal than it is, he said, his voice hardening. We'll find another place. It's not the end of the world. I stared at him in disbelief. How could he be so dismissive? So cold. You've sided with them, haven't you? I asked. You're more loyal to your parents than to me. They're my family, he said simply, as if that explained everything. And what am I? I asked, my voice breaking. Some outsider. Ethan didn't answer, and his silence was all I needed to hear. He had chosen his side, and it wasn't mine. That evening, I sat in the bedroom we once shared, now feeling like a stranger in my own space. I pulled out every document I could find, the purchase agreement, the title transfer, the so-called family trust paperwork. I wasn't a lawyer, but I knew something didn't add up. The next morning, I called my friend Emily. She was sharp, resourceful, and, most importantly, a lawyer. Vivian and Greg sold the house, I told her, my voice shaking. They tricked me into signing it over to them, and now I have nothing. Emily didn't hesitate. Bring me every document you have, she said. We'll figure this out. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not without a fight. I sat across from Emily in her office the next day, the stack of papers in front of us feeling heavier than it should. My hands trembled as I handed her each document, proof of my trust, my naivety, and their betrayal. Emily scanned the papers, her sharp eyes catching details I had missed. She flipped through the signed agreements and the title transfer forms, her expression darkening with every page. Finally, she set them down and leaned back in her chair. Sophia, she said, this isn't just shady, it's fraudulent. I blinked at her. Fraudulent? But I signed those papers. Yes, you did, she said, tapping one of the pages. But they misrepresented the terms. This clause here. She pointed to a section buried in legal jargon. It basically gives them the right to sell the house without notifying you. They disguised it as a family trust. That's deceitful, and it could hold up in court. I felt a wave of anger and relief. Anger at Vivian, Greg, and Ethan for manipulating me. Relief that I had someone in my corner willing to fight for me. What can I do? I asked, leaning forward. Emily smiled, a glint of determination in her eyes. We're going to build a case. But first, we need more evidence. Anything that shows their intent, emails, texts, conversations where they promised the transfer was temporary. Can you get access to Ethan's messages? My stomach sank. Ethan's been acting distant. I doubt he'd let me near his phone. Then we focus on his parents, Emily said. They're likely to have left a trail. People like that always do. I spent the next few days combing through every email, receipt, and note I could find. I didn't want to stay in the house, but I couldn't leave either. It wasn't just a home anymore, it was a crime scene. One evening, while Ethan was out, I remembered something Vivian had said about keeping documents in her office. Everything important is in one place, she had bragged during one of her many unsolicited lectures about financial responsibility. The idea made my heart race. If I could get into her office, I might find something to strengthen my case. But how? That's when I called Lisa, a friend who had once been close to the family. She still visited them occasionally and had access to their house. After some convincing, she agreed to help. The next evening, Lisa invited Vivian and Greg out for coffee, leaving their house empty. I slipped in with her spare key and made my way to Vivian's office. The room smelled of lavender and leather, a mix of refinement and pretension. I opened drawers, rifling through folders labeled with neat, cursive handwriting. My hands shook as I found a folder labeled Property Transactions. Inside were emails and contracts, including a damning email chain between Vivian and Greg discussing their plan to sell the house. Ethan's wife won't suspect a thing, one email read. She's too trusting. My chest tightened as I read the words. Trusting, that's what I'd been, and they had used it against me. I took pictures of every document and slipped out just as Lisa texted me that the coffee outing was ending. My heart raced all the way home, but for the first time, I felt like I had the upper hand. When Ethan returned that night, I was waiting for him in the living room. The pictures of the emails and contracts were spread across the coffee table. "What's this?" he asked, his face paling as he saw the evidence. "It's proof," I said coldly. "Proof that your parents planned to sell the house from the beginning. Proof that you knew and went along with it." Ethan stammered, "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, standing up. "That you lied to me. That you let your parents steal from me. There's nothing you can say to fix this, Ethan." He tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "We're done," I said firmly. "I'm filing for divorce. And I'm taking you and your parents to court." Emily was thrilled when I showed her the new evidence. "This is exactly what we needed," she said. "With these emails and the contracts, we can prove not only fraud but also intent to deceive." The next few weeks were a blur of legal proceedings. Ethan and his parents tried to intimidate me, sending messages and even showing up at my work, but I refused to back down. I was done being the trusting victim. In court, Emily presented our case flawlessly. She exposed how Vivian and Greg had manipulated me into signing over the house, highlighting their pattern of deceit. The emails and contracts were the final nail in their coffin. The judge ruled in my favor, awarding me compensation not just for the value of the house but also for emotional damages. Vivian and Greg were fined heavily, and their reputation in Maplewood was ruined. Ethan, who had been complicit in the scheme, was ordered to pay restitution as well. Standing outside the courthouse, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had lost a house, a husband, and a false sense of security, but I had gained something much more important, freedom and the strength to stand up for myself. I used part of the settlement money to buy a new home, a place that was truly mine. And as I stood in the empty living room of my new house, I smiled for the first time in months. This time, no one would take it from me.
My name is Megan Anderson. I got married right after graduating from college and had a child 3 years later. But we divorced soon after. 3 years have passed since then. And now I work at a real estate agency. My ex-husband, Billy, showed up and scoffed at me. "What, you work at a place like this?" "Ah, welcome. Idiot, you think I'd rent a cheap room like this?" I've remarried, and now I'm the son-in-law at a hotel. I'm set for life. I don't deal with poverty. If you're not here to rent, why did you come? I was just passing by. Then I saw your poor-looking face working here. So I thought I'd show off how rich I've become. Billy laughed, thinking he had become wealthy, and acted arrogantly. I can't believe this man was once my husband. It was a youthful mistake. Why did I marry him? It all started when we dated in college. We started dating as soon as we entered college, and he proposed just before graduation. When I told my parents I wanted to marry, they said it was too soon. Billy's parents thought the sooner, the better. They also said we should have children right away. Eventually, under pressure from Billy's parents, the marriage was arranged. And we had a family meeting. Billy's parents were adamant that we should have children immediately and that they had to be boys. Hearing this, my parents did not approve of the marriage. However, I loved Billy and decided to go ahead with the marriage against my parents' wishes. It was right after we registered our marriage. "Let's live at my parents' house." Billy suddenly suggested this. I wanted to live alone with him for a while. But he convinced me we should start saving immediately because children are expensive. Although I was anxious about living with his parents, I convinced myself it would work out and agreed. However, even after a year, I did not get pregnant. And both my in-laws and my husband started to berate me. A year has passed, and no child? You're such a failure as a wife. If you can't have children, you're just a maid. Don't embarrass me. I was attacked every day. Moreover, by that time, he started bad-mouthing my parents as well. "Your parents are really poor, huh?" "What do you mean?" "It was at the family meeting." "What about your mother's clothes? How can she wear such outdated clothes? And her bag and shoes are antiques. Your father's suit is old-fashioned too. Being okay with wearing that is like hanging up a sign saying you're poor. At least if it were a manager's level, it'd be okay. But that's like a regular employee, isn't it? Such things. You're a child, so you wouldn't understand the truth, huh? It's pathetic. I don't want to associate with such poor people. So I won't have any family relations with your parents. Not only my husband, but also my in-laws said the same. And I could no longer visit or contact my own family. However, when I checked how much my husband was earning, I found that while my father-in-law was a civil servant, my husband was just a factory worker at a small, unknown company. It wasn't a family that could talk big about others. Yet, he was adamant about not dealing with poor people, which made no sense. As a year passed and the second year was about to end, I realized I hadn't gotten my period. With a little hope, I visited the gynecologist and heard the doctor say, "Congratulations, you're pregnant." Overjoyed, I returned to my parents' house and informed my in-laws and husband, who were all delighted. This made me feel recognized as a wife. I thought this child would bring happiness like an angel. After that, they started treating me as a valued wife. When it was time to confirm the baby's gender, my in-laws said, "She's showing, so it must be a boy." She has a strong face, so it's definitely a boy. They didn't ask for a sex confirmation. Then, I gave birth amidst severe pain. However, it's a girl. That was the first thing my mother-in-law said. Once she knew it was a girl, she wouldn't even hold the baby, saying that having such a child disqualified me as a wife. Moreover, she said, this child should be given up for adoption somewhere. I desperately protected my child and begged them to spare us. I was okay with being a maid, but I wanted them to save my child. Then my father-in-law said there was no need for a maid to stay hospitalized forever. He tried to discharge me. Fortunately, the hospital did not allow it. Somehow, I managed to rest for 5 days. But once discharged, the treatment I received was even harsher than before. A maid doesn't need a room. They threw all my belongings into the yard. When I tried to pick them up and bring them inside, they yelled at me to throw them away. Reluctantly, they allowed me to keep a few personal belongings. But I was confined to a small space in the hallway. There was no heating, only a blanket. I folded it many times over, desperately trying to keep my child warm. Then, one day, I noticed my child had a fever. In the falling snow, I ran to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with pneumonia. I was told to hospitalize her immediately, and I stayed as an attendant. Even so, no one came to visit. My little daughter lay in the warm hospital room, breathing painfully. I wanted to let her sleep in a warm room with a soft blanket every day. That was all taken away just because she was a girl. Why can't it be a girl? Why does being a girl have to be so painful? No matter how much I think about it, I cannot understand. According to my in-laws, girls are useless because they marry off and are of no help. Just for that reason, is it right to deny being born a girl? It's wrong. This shouldn't be allowed. As I stroked my daughter's head, I kept apologizing to her, unable to make her happy. As her fever subsided and the day of our discharge approached, I felt fearful of returning to my in-laws' house. I thought, if we go back, she'll suffer the same way again. I don't want her to go through that. As I thought this, my husband surprisingly came. Hey, you're getting discharged soon, huh? Did you come to pick me up? Given everything that had happened, it was absolutely impossible. But maybe there was a faint hope inside me. Maybe he realized how lonely it was without the child while she was hospitalized. That's what I thought, or wanted to think. But my husband shattered that hope. Idiot, why would I come to pick you up? There's no way that would happen. Then. We're getting a divorce. I don't need a troublesome kid like that. This is the end for you and me. No way. You pay the hospital bills. I said from the beginning to give that kid up for adoption. Yet, you said no. So, there's no need for me to pay. Saying that, he threw the divorce papers and a pen onto the bed. Hurry up and sign it. I can't acknowledge someone who can only give birth to girls as my wife. Truly, marrying you was a mistake. I felt like everything I had endured was collapsing all at once. Thinking that I had made my child suffer for such a person, I felt like such a foolish mother. Then, without hesitation, I signed the divorce papers and handed them to Billy. Good, now you and I are strangers. I threw away all your belongings. Don't come back. What about my child's clothes? I threw those out too. I don't need stuff from such a kid. With that, Billy left the hospital room. The other mothers in the room had heard our conversation and looked at me with pity. What should I do? I'm being discharged today. I have no money, what should I do? While I was in despair, looking at my daughter, I felt a surge to rely on my parents. I hadn't contacted them in so long, and they had opposed the marriage that I had insisted on. They might not forgive me, but still, I wanted to save at least my child. With that thought, I put my daughter to bed and went to make a phone call. I called my father, apologized tearfully, and repeatedly asked for help. Without getting angry, he asked where I was. When I told him I was at the hospital, he came to pick me up right away and even paid the hospital bills. In the car on the way home, I told my parents everything and said, "I'm sorry, really sorry. Please, just save this child," and repeated it again. Then my mother said, "You've done well. Welcome back." My father assured me, "Don't worry. You are my daughter." When I returned to my family home, my room was as it had been before. The blanket seemed freshly aired out and fluffy, and I was grateful that I could lay my daughter on such a blanket. Once back home, I started working right away. Although my parents said I should take it easy for a while, I couldn't just rely on them. I was desperate to at least earn enough for my daughters and my own food. And now, 3 years later, this is how I re-encountered Billy. Working while taking care of a child, huh? You hate being poor, don't you? You went back to your parents' house, right? Yes, that's right. Going back to a poor family, just huddling together with other poor people. What a pity. As for me, my wife is the owner of a hotel. Seriously, I'm living the easy life. Billy was bragging about how rich he had become. I even have a son now, he's 2 years old. I couldn't have a son with you. But now I'm really set for life. As long as the kid grows up well, my old age is secure. Which hotel is it? You interested? I'll tell you, but you might feel even more pathetic. Billy said the name of the hotel. I thought for a moment and then responded, "Ah, that place. You know it?" "Yes, I know it. It's a famous place, a historic hotel. You'd be strange not to know it." You managed to remarry into such a hotel? I registered the marriage the day after we split. What? How could you? Were you dating that mistress while you were still married to me? Well, yeah. Since you couldn't have a child even after a year, my mother prepared the next partner for me. When I was introduced, she was just my type, so we started dating right away. She knew you were married, right? Why would I say that? It'd be a waste if she ran away because of that. So, you were trying to drive me out? Yeah, that's right. I thought it was hopeless since you couldn't have a child in a year. I was working on driving you out, but at the end of the second year, we found out you were pregnant. I was worried about what to do with the owner of the hotel if it was a boy. But it was lucky for me that it was a girl. So, you treated my daughter horribly because you were cheating? Can't help it. Even my mother said we didn't need a girl. What kind of people are you? Well, from my point of view, maybe you were the one cheating. What do you mean? The current wife was the real relationship. But seriously, I was freaking out about how to drive you out because you wouldn't leave. Then, when that kid got pneumonia, again, I was lucky. I really am lucky, huh? Yes. I'm lucky too. Lucky to have divorced a man like you. If we had continued as a couple, my daughter would have only been unhappy. Well, say whatever you want. My mom was encouraging it. There were no problems. Plus, she's an owner at a historic hotel. Such a good connection isn't something you just stumble upon. Compared to that, you're pitiful. A single mother in poverty. No one would remarry you, right? Looks like you're stuck in poverty for life. I don't plan to remarry, so I don't care about that. Sure. No need to pretend. No one would bother with you anyway. I really think about it sometimes. Now I'm among the rich. I've quit my job, you know. I'm the hotel owner's husband. I can live just by playing around. So, divorcing you was definitely the right move. Huh? You quit your job? Yeah, I quit. Working hard is for the poor. Is that okay? Of course, it's okay. I have nothing to worry about. Is there nothing to worry about? What do you mean by that? Doesn't that hotel have a huge debt? Huh? No way. What, are you saying stupid things because I've become rich? Jealous, huh? How pathetic. If you want, I can even treat you to some fun since you don't have money. I'll pay for it. Can't even take your kids to an amusement park or zoo, right? Though I find kids boring anyway. We were a couple once. If it's about adult fun, I'll cover it. You're really stupid, you know? The debt of that hotel is well known in the real estate industry. Don't lie. You're just trying to make me anxious. Hopeless, really. I handed him my business card. If you ever have trouble, feel free to contact me. Whether I'll help you or not, I'll think about it then. Who do you think you are? Some real estate agent's clerk can't help. He stopped mid-sentence because the business card read CEO. Huh, what does this mean? The parents you called poor own buildings everywhere. They're real estate tycoons, not just buildings but also large leisure facilities. No way. They dressed like that, how could they be so rich? My parents buy quality and use it for a long time. The outfit my mother wore then cost over $10,000, and her bag is worth at least $30,000. They repair things instead of throwing them away. They're not poor. They just understand the value of things. My father's suit then, you couldn't afford it in a lifetime. How can that be? Then why are you working here? If you're really the CEO, you wouldn't be working as a clerk. I'm not a clerk. I just happened to stop by today. But that suit, it's like what a clerk would wear. Yes, I choose such designs on purpose. There's no point in flaunting luxury to customers, right? No, that's weird. If you're a tycoon's daughter, you don't need to work. People feel alive by working. If you just play, you'll decay. That can't be right. Billy seemed taken aback but quickly recovered, trying to maintain his bravado. No. You're just a fool who can't do anything but work because you're poor at heart. It's definitely more fun to play. That's your way of life, I won't deny it, but your wife must be having a hard time. She's dealing with a huge debt, and her husband is such a mess. It's like you're living in a fantasy. I really did the right thing by divorcing you. Shut up. You couldn't even have a son, you're useless. Even if it were a boy, someone like you wouldn't make a difference. Besides, it takes two to make a child. Sure, your current wife had a boy first. But wouldn't a hotel value a girl more? What? Billy's face darkened, but he quickly returned to normal. Maybe divorcing you was a mistake. Why? If you're really a real estate tycoon's daughter, you must have more money than a hotel keeper. Yes. But I can do what I love thanks to my current wife. So, I don't think it was a mistake. And I had a son. Hope it doesn't go bankrupt. Billy left after that, but half a year later, in a panic, he contacted me saying, "I need to see you." There was no need to see him since we were divorced. But it seemed like that time had come, and I felt like seeing his pitiful face. When I arrived at the agreed place, he looked drastically different from half a year ago. With messy hair and a worn-out t-shirt. Utterly poor-looking despite previously hating such a look. It was clear the hotel was in serious trouble. "Shall we have coffee at a cafe?" Billy never drank vending machine beverages, so I asked, but he shook his head. "No, I don't have money." "Let's sit on a park bench." What a change. "I'll treat you, if your pride allows it." I don't have pride anymore. Billy laughed self-deprecatingly. "So, what did you want to talk about?" "I need help." "What happened?" "Actually, without my knowledge, my wife incurred a debt of $4 million. $4 million, that's huge." "Yeah, it's too much, I don't know what to do." "You mentioned the hotel had debts, was it about these $4 million? "I didn't know it was $4 million, but I heard it was a substantial amount." "How am I supposed to repay $4 million? "Well, why did she borrow so much?" She thought if we renovated the hotel, more customers would come. So, she borrowed to fund the renovation. $4 million for renovations? I don't think so. That seems excessive. There were also operational funds for the hotel. Apparently, she did a lot of things. I see, that's tough. Too tough. So, I need the money to pay it back. I want you to lend me some. If you borrow to pay it back, how will you repay me? That seems impossible. I'll make sure more customers come. Even though you hate working? I can't say that now. Lacks credibility, doesn't it? I can't imagine you working, and even if you did, I can't see someone with no experience like you managing it. I have no choice but to try. Just having motivation isn't enough to run a business. I know that. But I still have to do it. Sounds like a philosophy of grit. But that alone won't solve anything. You know that, especially since you lack grit. I'm sure I can manage if I get motivated. What if you're motivated and it still doesn't work? I said I'll manage it. You're being persistent. Of course, I am. You're talking about borrowing $4 million. How can I not be persistent? Besides, I can't lend money without collateral. I am the collateral. You say that with so much confidence, but you're literally worthless. Fine. I'll put up the hotel as collateral. I think the hotel is already collateral for the existing loans. Oh, right. Who's the guarantor for these $4 million? Huh? Guarantor? There must be one for such a large loan. It's my wife. How can the borrower be her own guarantor? You should really check into it. Why? There's no need to check. I give up. You really have no sense of crisis. I contacted my team to check on the guarantor for the $4 million, and as expected, it was Billy. That's ridiculous. I thought so. But I didn't know. Didn't you sign something? Billy thought for a moment, then realized. Ah. When I was drunk, she had me sign some papers. And you signed them without checking? Yeah, I was drunk and it was so troublesome. I was very sleepy. That must have been the guarantor document. That, she tricked me into being the guarantor? Well, you are a couple. It's more about your lack of awareness than being tricked. What should I do now? Being a guarantor means I'm responsible, right? Yes, now it's not just someone else's problem anymore. If your wife can't pay, the debt comes to you. How did it come to this? I can't just hang around anymore. That's where you're wrong? You shouldn't be just hanging around at this stage anyway. Maybe she took the $4 million loan because you were just fooling around. What do you mean? If you had been supportive as a husband, this might not have happened. Seriously. Billy was scratching his head, overwhelmed by the situation. But it was his fault for neglecting his responsibilities while playing around. That hotel. It's been a while since the loan. But the number of customers hasn't increased, right? Is that so? Your wife might disappear soon. Huh, why? There's $4 million in debt? That's why. She's probably at her limit. If she disappears, the $4 million debt falls to you, the guarantor, and she and the child can be free. If it's to protect her child, she might do just that. I'm going home. Take care. Billy hurried back to the hotel, but when he returned, his wife and child were gone. Only a note was left, which read, "Please take care of the $4 million. After seeing the note, Billy immediately contacted me. Megan, what should I do? What do I do now? Oh, what happened? Just like you said, she's gone with the child. I see. What should I do now? Looks like you'll have to pay. That's impossible, you know it. Come on, help me out. You can handle $4 million easily, right? Yes, I can manage that amount. I knew it. Please, help me out. I'm not going to help you. I don't even want to. Why not? Think about it. What did you say when I didn't get pregnant? You blamed everything on me. And what about when our daughter was born? Remember, you said a girl was unnecessary even though you were her father. To top it off, during a cold winter, you forced us into a corner of the hallway with only one blanket. Even thinking about it now makes me furious. For your family, our daughter got pneumonia. On the day of her discharge, you, without any money, thrust divorce papers at me and demanded I pay the hospital bills. You were worse than a demon. That's irrelevant now. Irrelevant? Do you think so? Do you know how delighted I am to see you drowning in debt? Seeing you suffer and panic gives me such pleasure. Huh, but you were worried about me, researching and… That wasn't for you. It was for me. It's more interesting if you are the guarantor, so I checked. I never intended to help you. After being ridiculed and our child suffering because of you, I won't feel relieved until I see your family fall into hell. Don't say that. That $4 million, there's no way you can handle it alone, right? Of course not. Why don't you ask your parents? Or maybe take out life insurance? There are ways. You're still on my side, right? You're suggesting these solutions. No. I'm merely guiding you to hell, along with your parents. And I've decided to sue for compensation. Plus, child support. $500 a month until she graduates from university. pay it all at once. That's impossible. Oh, come on, what's $200,000 more on top of $4 million? Why now? You can claim compensation for 3 years after discovering infidelity. If you hadn't blabbed about it, I wouldn't have known. Silly man. Please talk to a lawyer. It's impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Not my problem. It's your fault for underestimating women. Compensation was paid in full, but of course, paying the child support all at once was impossible. He promised to pay monthly once he started working, so for now, I agreed to wait. However, if he fails to pay, I will have his wages garnished. Despite having more than enough money, I can't forget the suffering my daughter endured until I see Billy fall into hell. Billy, who hates working, is now back at the factory, working day and night shifts. While he does transfer $500 monthly, it seems difficult to repay $4 million with just his factory salary. Upon investigation, he has been participating in pharmaceutical trials and risky jobs. No matter how hard he tries, it's impossible to pay it off. And he should just declare bankruptcy, but his misplaced pride won't allow it. His parents, once proud of their heir, Billy, have cut ties with him, likely to avoid the hell of debt descending upon themselves. As for me, I continue to thrive as a real estate company president. I never thought I'd become a real estate president, but I enjoy my job. I still live with my parents, and my daughter seems very happy to be with her grandparents. Every day, seeing my daughter's smile, I know divorcing was the right decision.
I never expected my grandmother's death to spark a war, but looking back, I should have seen it coming. The letter arrived 3 days after we buried her, its crisp white envelope carrying her familiar, elegant handwriting. My name, Callum, written in the careful loops and swirls I'd watched her perfect over countless Sunday afternoons in her garden. My name is Cal, and until last week, I was just the family disappointment, the hawthorn who chose dirt and plants over our prestigious restaurant legacy. Now I'm the unexpected heir to my grandmother's estate, and my entire family has lost their minds. I stood in Grandma Mabel's garden, her letter trembling in my hands as the evening sun cast long shadows across her prized rose bushes. The same roses she'd taught me to tend when I was just a kid with scraped knees and too many questions. You can't be serious. My brother Jackson's voice crackled through my phone's speaker. The house? The whole property? What about the restaurant? The letter's pretty clear, I said, scanning the words again. She left everything to me, Jax. The house, the garden, even her savings. This is bullshit, Cal, and you know it. His voice had that edge to it, the one that always preceded an explosion. Dad's already talking to lawyers. You need to do the right thing here. I watched a monarch butterfly land on one of Mabel's white roses. The right thing according to who? Dad. You. According to the family. That property could save the restaurant. We're struggling, Cal. You know this. The butterfly took flight, and I followed its path until it disappeared over the garden wall. Maybe if you and Dad hadn't sunk all that money into that ridiculous expansion. Don't. Jackson cut me off. Don't you dare criticize what you abandoned. Some of us actually stuck around to carry on the family legacy. I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. Funny how the only legacy that matters is the one you chose. Cal. A new voice joined the conversation, Bianca, Jackson's fiancée. Be reasonable. Your grandmother wouldn't have wanted to cause all this drama. She loved the restaurant too. Did she? I walked over to the greenhouse where Mabel and I had spent countless hours. Because according to this letter, she wanted me to have everything specifically to prevent it from being sold off to save the restaurant. The silence on the other end was deafening. Listen, Bianca's voice turned honey-sweet. Why don't you come over for dinner tonight? We can discuss this as a family. Your mother's making your favorite pasta. I touched the greenhouse door, remembering how Mabel would always say, "Trust the garden, Cal. It never lies." Unlike people who could wrap manipulation in the guise of family dinner. Thanks, but I have plans. I didn't, but they didn't need to know that. I need to start sorting through Grandma's things. Cal, Jackson started, but I ended the call. Inside the greenhouse, everything was exactly as Mabel had left it. Her gardening gloves still draped over her favorite wooden chair, her tools arranged with military precision on the workbench. I unfolded her letter again, reading the last paragraph that had set this whole mess in motion. My dearest Cal, I know this decision won't be popular, but you're the only one who truly understands what I've built here. This garden isn't just plants and soil. It's a testament to choosing your own path, even when others can't understand it. Don't let them destroy it. And Cal, check behind the loose brick in the greenhouse's north wall. There's something else you need to see. I looked up at the north wall, where generations of ivy had made their home. Somewhere behind those leaves was another piece of Mabel's puzzle, and something told me it would only add fuel to this family fire. My phone buzzed again, a text from my mother this time. Your father is very disappointed. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I turned off my phone and started examining the wall. Whatever Mabel had hidden, I needed to find it before anyone else did. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear. This inheritance wasn't just about a house and garden. It was about to expose every crack in our family's carefully maintained facade. The doorbell chimed just as I was prying at the loose brick in the greenhouse. Of course, they wouldn't wait for an invitation. Through the glass walls, I could see my parents' silhouettes approaching, my mother's pearls catching the late afternoon light. I quickly smoothed my dirt-covered hands on my jeans and met them at the garden path. My father's disapproving gaze swept over my casual attire, while my mother clutched her designer handbag like a shield. Callum, my father said, using my full name, never a good sign. We need to discuss this situation like adults. I was just working in the greenhouse, I said, gesturing to my clothes. Let me clean up and... Playing in the dirt again? My mother's smile was tight. Some things never change. We settled in Mabel's kitchen, where the ghost of countless Sunday dinners hung in the air. My mother immediately began straightening things, rearranging the fruit bowl as if its slightly askew position personally offended her. The restaurant's in trouble, Cal, my father began, his voice carrying that familiar weight of expectation. Real trouble. Your brother's been working himself to death trying to keep it afloat. I heard about the expansion problems, I said, keeping my voice neutral. The new location isn't performing well? Don't pretend you care now, my father snapped. You walked away from all that responsibility years ago. Left it all on Jackson's shoulders. My mother touched his arm. Everett, please. We're here to talk solutions. She turned to me, her expression softening in that calculated way I knew too well. Sweetheart, this house. It's just too much for one person. And the maintenance costs alone. I can manage, I said firmly. Grandma Mabel taught me everything about maintaining the property. Ah yes, all those hours wasted in that garden when you should have been learning the business, my father muttered. A memory surfaced, 16-year-old me, proudly showing my father the herb garden I'd planted for the restaurant's kitchen. His dismissive wave as he walked away, saying real men don't play in the dirt. I pushed the memory aside. The property's value could save everything, my mother pressed on. The restaurant, our family's legacy. What about Grandma's legacy? I challenged. This garden was her life's work. It's a hobby, Callum. The restaurant is our family's foundation. My phone buzzed, a text from Tessa. Don't let them bulldoze you. Remember what Mabel always said about standing your ground. I'm not selling, I said, standing up. Grandma left this place to me for a reason. My father's face darkened. You ungrateful. Everett, my mother interrupted, her voice honey-sweet again. Cal, darling, at least look at the offer we've prepared. It's very generous. She pulled out an envelope from her bag, sliding it across the kitchen table. I didn't touch it. This isn't about money, I said. This is about respecting Grandma's wishes. Respect? My father's laugh was harsh. Where was your respect when you abandoned your family obligations? When you left your brother to shoulder everything alone? I didn't abandon anything, I shot back. I chose a different path. Grandma understood that. Your grandmother. My mother hesitated, exchanging a look with my father. She wasn't thinking clearly near the end. Perhaps if we contest the will. Get out. The words came out quiet but firm. Excuse me. My father's face reddened. I said get out. Both of you. And take your offer with you. My mother's face crumpled in that practiced way that used to make me cave instantly. Cal, please. Now. They left, my father's angry muttering mixing with my mother's theatrical sniffles. As their car pulled away, I noticed something had fallen from my mother's bag. A small notebook I recognized as Grandma Mabel's garden journal. Flipping it open, I found recent entries I'd never seen before, including one dated just weeks before her death. The words made my blood run cold. They're planning something. Must protect Cal. Must hide the truth about. The rest of the page was torn out. I looked back toward the greenhouse where the loose brick waited. Whatever Mabel had hidden, I needed to find it fast. Because now I knew, this wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. There was something else, something my family desperately wanted to keep buried. I was still trying to make sense of Mabel's torn journal entry when Tessa called. You need to get down to the county clerk's office. Now. What? Why? Because your brother and his fiancée just walked in with a stack of papers, and I overheard them talking about property transfers. Tessa worked as a legal secretary there. Something's not right, Cal. 20 minutes later, I was speed walking through the courthouse's marble halls, my muddy boots leaving tracks on the polished floor. I rounded the corner just in time to see Bianca at the clerk's window, sliding documents across the counter with perfectly manicured hands. I need to see those papers, I said, stepping up beside her. Bianca's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. Cal, what a surprise. Family business, you know how it is. Exactly. Which is why I need to see what you're filing. The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked between us uncertainly. Sir, those documents concern my grandmother's property, I said firmly. I'm the legal owner. Actually, Jackson's voice came from behind me. That's what we're here to correct. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, but his jaw was set with determination. The will was never properly executed. We have proof. Proof? I laughed. What proof? Grandma Mabel wasn't competent when she made those changes, Bianca said smoothly. We have medical documentation. The clerk frowned. I'll need to verify. Here. Bianca produced another document with a flourish. Signed by her doctor. I snatched the paper before anyone could stop me. The signature at the bottom made my stomach drop, Dr. James Rivers. Bianca's father. This is fraud, I said, my voice shaking. Your father never treated Grandma. He consulted on her case, Bianca replied. And as a respected neurologist, his opinion carries weight. Mabel was sharp as a tack until the day she died. I snapped. Everyone knew that. Did they? Jackson stepped closer. Or did you just see what you wanted to see? Face it, Cal. She wasn't thinking clearly when she cut everyone else out. She didn't cut anyone out. She made a choice. A choice you manipulated her into making, Bianca said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. All those hours in the garden, playing the devoted grandson while the rest of the family actually worked. Don't you dare. What's going on here? A new voice cut through the tension. Martin Chun, the family's longtime lawyer, stood in the doorway, briefcase in hand. Martin, Jackson started, we were just filing fraudulent documents, it appears. Martin stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. I was Mabel's attorney for 30 years. I supervised the execution of her will, which was witnessed by 2 independent parties. She was completely competent. Bianca's smile finally cracked. This isn't your concern. Actually, it is. Martin turned to the clerk. Please note that any attempts to transfer this property without proper authority could constitute legal fraud. I'll be filing an injunction immediately. The clerk quickly gathered the papers, stamping them with a large red suspended mark. Jackson grabbed my arm as I turned to leave. You're destroying this family. I looked at his hand, then into his eyes. No, Jax. You're doing that all on your own. Back in Mabel's garden, I finally found the loose brick and the envelope hidden behind it. Inside was a USB drive and another note. The truth about the restaurant's finances. Keep this safe. They'll try anything to hide what really happened to the money. My phone buzzed, a text from Bianca. This isn't over. You have no idea what you're up against. I looked at the USB drive in my hand, then at the garden where Mabel had taught me that growth sometimes requires cutting away the dead parts to save the whole. She'd known this was coming. She'd prepared for it. Game on, I whispered, pocketing the drive. Because now I understood. This wasn't just about saving her garden anymore. This was about exposing whatever rot had taken root in my family's foundation, no matter the cost. I started toward the house, already planning my next move. Behind me, storm clouds gathered over the garden, promising rain. Perfect weather for unearthing buried secrets. The email from Evergreen Landscapes arrived while I was reviewing the files on Mabel's USB drive. A job offer. Not just any job, but the kind that could define a career. Lead designer for their West Coast division, complete with a 6-figure salary and creative control over major projects. The catch? I'd have to move to Seattle. Leave the garden. Leave everything. I was still staring at the screen when Tessa showed up with coffee and a determined look in her eyes. "You're brooding," she said, setting a cup beside me. "I can smell it from the driveway. Look at this." I turned the laptop toward her, then gestured at the scattered financial documents surrounding it. "And all this? The restaurant's been hemorrhaging money for years, but not because of bad business." Tessa leaned in, scanning the numbers. "Someone's been cooking the books? More like feeding them steroids. The expansion money? Most of it disappeared into offshore accounts." I rubbed my eyes. Jackson's signature is all over these transfers, but the patterns, they're too sophisticated for him. "Bianca," Tessa said quietly. She worked in corporate finance before getting engaged to Jackson. My phone buzzed, another text from Martin Chin. "Meeting tomorrow. Bring the evidence. And Cal, watch your back." The doorbell rang, making us both jump. Through the window, I spotted a sleek black car I didn't recognize. "Mr. Hawthorne?" A woman in a crisp suit stood at the door, flanked by two men carrying briefcases. "I'm Rebecca Walsh, representing Evergreen Landscapes. We were in the area and thought we'd discuss our offer in person." My stomach dropped. No one just happens to be in the area with a full legal team. This isn't a good time. "Actually," she stepped forward, "it's the perfect time, especially given your current family situation." The way she said it made my skin crawl. In the kitchen, Tessa was quickly gathering the scattered documents. "How did you know about that?" Rebecca smiled. "We do our homework, Mr. Hawthorne. We also know about the attempted property transfer today. You're fighting a losing battle here. We're offering you an exit strategy. The garden can be maintained by professionals. We'll even include it in your contract. But you need to decide quickly." She checked her watch. "Before things get messy, eh?" "What does that mean?" "It means your brother's fiancé has friends in high places. The kind who can make fraud allegations stick, regardless of truth. The kind who can ensure you never work in this industry again." My hands clenched. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm offering you protection. And an opportunity." She placed her card on the counter. "You have 24 hours. Choose wisely." After they left, Tessa found me in the greenhouse, aggressively pruning Mabel's roses. "Cal, stop. You're butchering them." I looked down at the mangled stems. They knew about the property transfer attempt. Hours after it happened. "How?" "Because this was never just about the garden." Tessa picked up one of the fallen roses. "Think about it. The restaurant's money laundering, Bianca's connections, this sudden job offer. They're trying to get you out of the way." "But why? What's so important about this property?" Tessa's eyes widened as she looked past me. "Cal, the zoning maps in Mabel's files. Did you check them?" I hadn't. We rushed back to the laptop, pulling up the documents. There it was, a proposed rezoning plan for the entire neighborhood, with Mabel's property at its center. Prime location for a massive commercial development. "This is what they're after," I whispered. "The garden's just collateral damage." My phone buzzed again. "Jackson. Take the job offer, Cal. Please. While you still can." For the first time, I heard real fear in my brother's message. Whatever was happening, he was in deep. Maybe too deep. The rose in Tessa's hand had left a trail of petals on the floor. Red drops like blood, marking a path I had to choose. Run toward safety or stay and fight, knowing it might cost me everything. Mabel's voice echoed in my memory. "Sometimes the hardest growth comes from standing your ground." I picked up Rebecca's card and slowly tore it in half. "Call Martin," I told Tessa. "Tell him to bring everything he has tomorrow. It's time to prune the family tree." Martin Chen's office felt too small for the weight of what we were discussing. The financial records from Mabel's USB drive were spread across his desk like a paper trail of betrayal, each document adding another layer to the conspiracy. "They're planning to demolish the entire historic district," Martin said, adjusting his glasses. "Your grandmother's property is the keystone. Without it, their development plans fall apart." "And the restaurant?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "A front. They've been laundering money through it for years. Your brother's signature is on everything, but," Martin hesitated. "But what?" "The patterns match other cases I've seen. Cases involving the Rivers family's development company." My phone buzzed, a text from Jackson. "Need to talk. Alone. Please." I showed Martin the message. He shook his head. "Don't go. It's too risky." But I was already standing. He's still my brother. The restaurant was closed when I arrived, but the lights were on. Through the window, I could see Jackson sitting at the bar, looking older than his 34 years. "You shouldn't have come," he said as I walked in. "But I'm glad you did. Start talking." He poured 2 whiskeys, sliding one toward me. I never wanted any of this. The restaurant, the expansion, the development deals, it was all Dad and Bianca. I just wanted to make them proud. He laughed bitterly. To survive. You got out, Cal. You had the courage to walk away. I got trapped. So tell the truth. Help me stop them. I can't. His hands shook as he reached for his glass. Bianca's father. He doesn't just destroy businesses, Cal. He destroys lives. The front door chimed. Bianca walked in, followed by my father and 2 men I didn't recognize. Well, isn't this touching? Bianca's smile was sharp. The prodigal brothers reunited at last. You set me up, I said to Jackson. He couldn't meet my eyes. Nothing personal, one of the men said, moving to block the exit. Just business. My father stepped forward. Sign the papers, Cal. Transfer the property. We can all walk away from this. Walk away? I laughed. Like you walked away from Grandma Mabel when she refused to sell? Is that why she died so suddenly? The room went silent. Jackson's face drained of color. Careful, little brother, Bianca warned. Some accusations can't be taken back. Like money laundering? Or fraud? I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. Everything you just said is being recorded and live-streamed to Tessa. The bigger man started forward, but Bianca held up her hand. You're bluffing. Check your phones, I said. It should be hitting social media right about now. They all reached for their phones. In the chaos, I edged toward the door. You idiot, my father snarled. You'll destroy everything. No, I said. You did that yourself. I'm just pruning away the rot. I made it outside just as police sirens started wailing in the distance. Tessa was waiting in her car around the corner, engine running. Did you get it? I asked as I jumped in. She held up her phone, grinning. Every word. The police and FBI are on their way. Martin's meeting us at the station. As we drove away, I watched the restaurant shrink in the rearview mirror. The place that had imprisoned my brother and corrupted my family, now about to become a crime scene. My phone buzzed one last time, a message from an unknown number. Your grandmother would be proud. But this isn't over. I stared at the message, wondering if it was from Martin or someone else. Because despite everything we'd just exposed, something told me we'd only scratched the surface of what Mabel had discovered. You okay? Tessa asked. I thought about Jackson's haunted eyes, my father's rage, and Bianca's cold smile. About the garden waiting at home, where tomorrow I'd plant new seeds in soil enriched by everything that had died before. No, I said honestly. But I will be. The sirens grew louder behind us, their wail mixing with the night air like justice finally breaking free of its chains. Sometimes I realized revenge doesn't taste like victory. Sometimes it tastes like survival. The wedding invitation arrived exactly 1 month after my father's arrest. Cream-colored paper with gold embossing, like nothing was wrong. Like our family hadn't just imploded in a scandal that made headlines across 3 states. You're not actually going, Tessa said, watching me turn the invitation over in my hands. We were sitting in Mabel's kitchen, where the morning light still couldn't chase away the shadows of recent events. Jackson posted bail for Dad, I said. Used everything he had left. That's not an answer. I traced the embossed letters. Despite everything, the fraud charges, the ongoing investigation, the revelations about Mabel's death, Jackson and Bianca were moving forward with their wedding. At the restaurant, of all places. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. He's your father, Cal. Whatever you think he did, he doesn't deserve this. Another message followed. Jackson needs his brother there. Please don't make this harder. I laughed bitterly. Make this harder? They tried to frame me for fraud, threaten me with thugs, and possibly. I couldn't finish the sentence about Mabel. The investigation was still ongoing, but the evidence pointed to her death being far from natural. Which is exactly why you shouldn't go, Tessa insisted. The doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw Martin Chen's car in the driveway. It's not good, he said as soon as I let him in. The Rivers family is pushing back hard. Their lawyers are trying to discredit the evidence, claiming it was obtained illegally. But the live stream? They're saying it was edited, manipulated. Martin looked exhausted. And Jackson? He's changed his statement. Says you set them up, that you're the one who orchestrated everything. The kitchen suddenly felt too small. Through the window, I could see Mabel's garden, where the roses she'd loved so much were beginning to wilt. Why would he do that? Because I had to. Jackson's voice came from the doorway. None of us had heard him come in. He looked terrible, thin, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. They have Mom, Cal. What? She's resting at Bianca's family estate. They're calling it a nervous breakdown, but... He swallowed hard. I had to change my statement. I had to protect her. The pieces clicked into place. The wedding wasn't a celebration. It was a show of force. A message that the Rivers family was still in control. The invitation, I said slowly. It's a trap, isn't it? Jackson wouldn't meet my eyes. Just come to the wedding, Cal. Please. Make a speech, wish us well, show everyone that the family drama was overblown. Maybe then what? They'll let Mom go. They'll forget about destroying everything Mabel built. They'll let us live, Jackson whispered. After he left, I stood in the garden, surrounded by dying roses. Everything Mabel had created, everything she'd fought to protect, was slipping away. And now I had to choose between justice for her death and my mother's safety. There might be another way, Martin said, joining me outside. But it's risky, and you'd have to trust me completely. I looked at the wilting garden, remembering Mabel's words about growth requiring sacrifice. About how sometimes you had to cut away what you love to save what matters most. Whatever it takes, I said. My phone buzzed one final time, a message from Bianca. Looking forward to having the whole family together again. Don't forget to wear black. It's a formal affair after all. The threat wasn't even subtle anymore. Wear black like we're all attending a funeral. Maybe we were. I picked up a dead rose, its petals crumbling in my hand. Tell me the plan, Martin, and then help me find a suit. Because sometimes, to save what you love, you have to walk straight into the dragon's lair. Even if you know you might not walk back out. Tessa touched my arm. Cal. I know, I said, watching the rose petals scatter in the wind. But Mabel taught me that every garden needs pruning sometimes. Even if it means cutting all the way down to the roots. The restaurant gleamed like a funeral parlor, all black ties and forced smiles. I adjusted my dark suit, the same one I'd worn to Mabel's funeral, and walked into the lion's den. Bianca had transformed the place, replacing its warm family atmosphere with cold elegance. Black roses everywhere, their thorns prominently displayed. A message just for me. Cal. My mother's voice trembled as she approached, flanked by two of Bianca's cousins, men with hard eyes and concealed weapons. You came. Her hands shook as she reached for me, and I saw the faint bruising around her wrist. My blood boiled, but I kept my face neutral. Martin's plan required patience. Wouldn't miss it, I said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Where's the happy couple? Making an entrance, of course. Mayor Davidson appeared beside me, champagne in hand. Though I must say, I'm more interested in your work, Cal. That community garden project of yours has everyone talking. Bianca materialized before I could respond, resplendent in white. Mayor Davidson, I'm so glad you could make it. Though perhaps we should discuss the development proposal, rather than gardening. Actually, the mayor said, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Seems there are some irregularities in the paperwork. A commotion near the entrance cut him off. Jackson burst in, his face ashen. The FBI. There! The doors flew open. Agents poured in, led by Martin Chun, not just a lawyer, but a federal investigator who'd been building this case for years. Nobody move. Martin's voice boomed. We have warrants for multiple arrests. Bianca's smile turned razor-sharp. This is a private event. Whatever you think you have. We have everything, I said quietly. The real estate fraud, the money laundering, the offshore accounts. And Mabel's autopsy results. Her composure cracked. You're bluffing. The garden soil, Bianca. Did you know Mabel tested it regularly? Kept records of every chemical change. I stepped closer, including the poison that showed up 3 days before she died. One of Bianca's cousins reached inside his jacket. 3 agents immediately drew weapons. It's over, Martin announced. Bianca Rivers, Everett Hawthorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and first-degree murder. My father, who'd been silent until now, lunged for me. You ungrateful. Jackson caught him, surprising everyone. Stop, Dad. Just stop. The mayor watched in shock as agents led Bianca away. My God, I had no idea. That's why they wanted the garden gone, I said. It held the evidence. Mabel knew what they were doing, so they killed her. But she'd already prepared her revenge. The inheritance, Jackson whispered. She left it to you because I was the only one who would understand the garden's secrets. I touched one of the black roses. She taught me that every plant tells a story if you know how to read it. As the chaos unfolded, my mother collapsed into my arms, finally free from her captors. I'm so sorry, Cal. We should have listened. Mrs. Hawthorne, Martin interrupted gently. We'll need your statement about your detention at the Rivers estate. I watched them lead my father away in handcuffs, saw Bianca's mask of sophistication crumble as agents read her rights. The restaurant, the source of so much family strife, would likely be seized as evidence. Jackson stood alone by the altar, his world imploding. What happens now? Now! I looked at the black roses, thinking of Mabel's garden waiting at home. Now we start over. Plant something new. Together? He sounded like the brother I'd once known, before ambition and greed poisoned everything. Maybe, if you're willing to get your hands dirty. The mayor cleared his throat. Speaking of new growth, Cal, I'd love to discuss expanding your community garden project. The city could use more of your expertise. Outside, police lights painted the night in red and blue. Inside, among the wreckage of what was supposed to be a wedding, I felt Mabel's presence. She'd known it would end this way. Not with a celebration of love, but with justice finally blooming through the cracks of our broken family. I loosened my black tie. Tomorrow, I'd plant white roses in the garden. But tonight, there was one more truth to unearth. 1 year later, I stood in Mabel's garden, my garden now, watching Jackson struggle with a particularly stubborn root. His prison-pale skin was slowly gaining color under the summer sun. "You're doing it wrong," I said, kneeling beside him. "Here, like this." I demonstrated the proper angle, remembering Mabel teaching me the same lesson years ago. 3 months into his community service, and my brother was finally learning the difference between weeds and wildflowers. The judge had been surprisingly poetic in her sentencing. Help restore what his actions had helped destroy. The mayor called again, Tessa said, appearing with 3 glasses of lemonade. The community garden network is ready to expand to the next district. I nodded, watching a monarch butterfly land on one of Mabel's white roses, the ones I'd replanted after the wedding that never was. The restaurant was gone now, converted into the city's first urban farming education center. Sometimes karma has a green thumb. Mom's therapy is going well, Jackson said quietly, accepting the lemonade. She's talking about volunteering at the center, teaching kids about herbs and cooking. Our father's trial had broken something in her, but like the garden after winter, she was slowly coming back to life. Some plants need severe pruning to grow back stronger. Found something else too, Jackson added, pulling a weathered envelope from his pocket. Behind the old restaurant's wine cellar wall during demolition. It's from Mabel. My hands trembled as I opened it. The paper was old, but the words were clear. My dearest boys, if you're reading this, then everything has happened as I feared it might. But remember, even the hardest soil can nurture new growth if you're willing to work it together. There's more, Jackson said, his voice thick. Look at the date. The letter was written the day before she died. She'd known what was coming, had planted the seeds of justice even in her final hours. Cal! My mother's voice came from the garden path. She looked smaller now, humbler, but her eyes were clear. The Heritage Rose Society called. They want to register Mabel's white hybrid officially. Did they say what they'll name it? She smiled softly. They're calling it Mabel's Truth. I looked around at what we'd built from the ashes of our family's implosion. The garden had expanded, now feeding 3 local food banks. The education center was thriving. Even Bianca's father's development company had crumbled under federal investigation. You know what's weird? Jackson said, finally defeating the stubborn root. I always thought the restaurant was our legacy. But Mabel knew better. She saw what really needed to grow. A familiar voice seemed to whisper in the breeze. Trust the garden, Cal. It never lies. There's something else, Tessa said, holding up her tablet. Remember that mysterious text you got? Martin finally traced it. It wasn't from him. Then who? Margaret Rivers, Bianca's grandmother. Turns out she and Mabel were friends in college. She's been feeding information to the FBI for years, trying to stop her own family's corruption. I thought about karma again, about how the truth finds its way to the surface like a determined seedling pushing through concrete. The garden needs a new section, I decided. Something to mark everything that's happened. Any ideas? Jackson stood, brushing dirt from his knees. What about a maze? But instead of walls, we use flowering vines. Something that looks complicated from the outside, but actually leads to something simple. Like truth, our mother added softly. I picked up my gardening tools, Mabel's old ones that still fit my hands perfectly. Better get started then. These things take time to grow. As we worked together under the summer sun, I realized that revenge, like gardening, isn't about destruction. It's about clearing space for something better to grow. Mabel had taught me that, in her own way, through every seed we'd planted together. The butterfly took flight, rising above the garden where our family was slowly, steadily, putting down new roots. Different from the ones we'd had before, but stronger for having weathered the storm. Sometimes the best revenge is simply growing beyond what others thought possible. I smoothed my apron and took a deep breath, steeling myself for the conversation I knew was coming. George's heavy footsteps echoed through the hallway, and I braced myself against the kitchen counter. "Tara, honey?" His voice was tentative, almost sheepish. "We need to talk." I turned, forcing a smile. "What is it, George?" He stepped into the kitchen, a familiar figure hovering behind him. My stomach dropped as I recognized Adrian, George's brother, the last person I wanted to see darkening our doorstep. "Look who showed up." George's grin was strained. "Adrian's in town and needs a place to stay for a while. I told him he could crash here." Adrian sauntered in, all easy smiles and charm. "Hey, sis! Long time no see." I gripped the edge of the counter, willing my voice to remain steady. "Adrian, what a surprise." George's eyes darted between us, clearly sensing the tension. "It'll just be for a few days, right, Adrian?" "Oh, absolutely," Adrian drawled, already making himself at home by opening our fridge. "Just until I get back on my feet." I'd heard that line before. The last time Adrian had stayed with us, those few days had stretched into months of chaos and drained bank accounts. "George, can I speak to you privately for a moment?" I managed through gritted teeth. We stepped into the hallway and I hissed, "What were you thinking?" "You know how I feel about Adrian staying here." George ran a hand through his thinning hair. I know, but he's family, Tara. We can't just turn him away." "Can't we?" I crossed my arms. "After everything that happened last time?" Before George could respond, a small voice piped up from the stairs. "Dad, who's that man in the kitchen?" We both turned to see our son, Ethan, peering down at us with wide eyes. George's face softened. "That's your Uncle Adrian, buddy. He's going to be staying with us for a little while." Ethan's brow furrowed. "Is that why you and Mom are fighting?" "We're not fighting, sweetie," I said quickly, shooting George a pointed look. "We're just discussing things. Why don't you go say hello to your uncle?" As Ethan padded into the kitchen, I turned back to George. "This isn't over. We need to set some ground rules." George nodded, looking relieved to postpone the argument. We rejoined the others in the kitchen, where Adrian was regaling Ethan with some far-fetched tale. "And that's how I wrestled an alligator in Florida," Adrian finished with a flourish. Ethan's eyes were as big as saucers. "Wow, Uncle Adrian, you're so cool." I felt a pang of worry. Adrian had always been able to charm Ethan, and I feared the influence he might have on our impressionable son. "All right, Ethan," I said, perhaps a bit too sharply. "Time to get ready for bed. Say goodnight to everyone." As Ethan trudged upstairs, Adrian turned to us with that infuriating grin. "So, where am I bunking?" George glanced at me nervously. We thought the guest room would be." "Actually," I interrupted, an idea forming, "the guest room is being repainted. You'll have to take the pull-out couch in the basement." Adrian's smile faltered for just a moment. "Oh, well, that's fine. I'm not picky." As George showed Adrian downstairs, I allowed myself a small, vindictive smile. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that night, as George and I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. "George," I whispered, "promise me this won't be like last time." He rolled over, wrapping an arm around me. "I promise, Tara. It'll be different this time." But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't help but wonder if I was naive to believe him. Little did I know, Adrian's arrival was just the beginning of a storm that would threaten to tear our family apart. A week into Adrian's stay, and our once peaceful home had become a minefield of tension. I stood at the kitchen sink, scrubbing dishes with more force than necessary, when George stumbled in, bleary-eyed and reeking of cigarette smoke. "Morning, honey," he mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot. I bit back a sharp retort. "It's 2 p.m, George. Where have you been?" He shrugged, avoiding my gaze. "Just catching up with Adrian. Lost track of time." "Lost track of time?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "You missed Ethan's soccer game. He was crushed when you didn't show up." George's face fell. "Oh, God, I completely forgot. Is he?" "He's in his room," I cut him off, probably still crying. Guilt flashed across George's face, but before he could respond, Adrian sauntered into the kitchen, looking far too chipper for someone who'd been out all night. "Hey, family," he announced, clapping George on the back. Who's up for a barbecue? My treat. I slammed a plate down, making both men jump. A barbecue? Are you kidding me? You two have been out God knows where all night, and now you want to play happy families? Adrian held up his hands, that infuriating smirk still on his face. Whoa, sis. Calm down. We were just having a little fun. Don't call me sis, I snapped. And don't tell me to calm down. This isn't a frat house, Adrian. We have responsibilities here. George stepped between us, ever the peacemaker. Tara, honey, let's not fight. I'll go talk to Ethan, okay? As George headed upstairs, Adrian leaned against the counter, eyeing me. You know, Tara, you really need to loosen up. All this stress can't be good for you. I whirled on him, dish towel clenched in my fist. What I need is for you to stop disrupting our lives. When are you planning on leaving exactly? Adrian's smile faltered for a moment. Soon. Just need to get a few things sorted out first. What things? I pressed, suspicion gnawing at me. What are you really doing here, Adrian? Before he could answer, a crash from upstairs made us both jump. I raced up the stairs, Adrian close behind, to find George standing in Ethan's doorway looking shell-shocked. Ethan's room was a disaster. Books and toys were strewn everywhere, and in the center of it all stood our son, red-faced and trembling with anger. I hate you, Ethan screamed at George. You're never here anymore. You're always with him. He pointed accusingly at Adrian. I pushed past George, kneeling in front of Ethan. Sweetie, calm down. Let's talk about this. But Ethan was inconsolable. No! I want Dad to go away. I want Uncle Adrian to go away. I hate them both. George looked stricken. Son, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Get out, Ethan yelled, hurling a toy car that narrowly missed George's head. I turned to George and Adrian, my voice low and dangerous. View. Downstairs, now. In the living room, I faced the two men, fury simmering just beneath the surface. This ends now. I want answers. What's really going on here? George and Adrian exchanged a look that sent chills down my spine. Tara, George began, his voice trembling. There's something we need to tell you. Adrian cut in, his usual bravado gone. It's not as bad as it seems, I swear. We just got into a bit of trouble, that's all. What kind of trouble? I demanded, dread pooling in my stomach. George took a deep breath. We owe some people money. A lot of money. The room seemed to spin around me. How much? The number George whispered made my knees weak. I sank onto the couch, my mind reeling. How? I managed to choke out. How did this happen? As Adrian launched into an explanation about bad investments and unlucky bets, I caught sight of something that made my blood run cold. Peeking out of Adrian's jacket pocket was a pawn shop receipt. In that moment, I knew. This was just the tip of the iceberg, and our family was headed for a storm that threatened to tear us apart. The pawn shop receipt burned a hole in my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that George and Adrian were hiding something far worse than they'd admitted. Over the next few days, I kept my eyes and ears open, determined to uncover the truth. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon when I first noticed the hushed phone calls. George's voice drifted from his study, tense and urgent. We need more time, he hissed. Just a few more days, I swear we'll have it. I crept closer to the door, straining to hear. No, don't do that, George pleaded. We'll figure something out. Adrian's working on it. My heart raced. Who was he talking to? What did Adrian have to do with it? The conversation ended abruptly, and I barely had time to retreat before George emerged, looking haggard and pale. Everything okay? I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. He jumped, startled. Oh, Tara. Yeah, just work stuff. Nothing to worry about. But the tremor in his hands told a different story. That night, I lay awake, listening to George toss and turn beside me. Around midnight, his phone buzzed. He slipped out of bed thinking I was asleep and crept downstairs. I followed, silent as a shadow, and watched from the top of the stairs as he met Adrian in the kitchen. We're running out of time, George whispered urgently. They're getting impatient. Adrian ran a hand through his hair. I know, but I've got a plan. There's this guy I know. He can get us the money. But what? George pressed. Adrian hesitated. It's not exactly legal, George. We'd be taking a big risk. My blood ran cold. What had they gotten themselves into? George paced the kitchen. I don't know, Adrian. If we get caught? We won't, Adrian assured him. Trust me, brother, it's our only way out of this mess. I'd heard enough. I stepped into the kitchen, making both men jump. What mess? I demanded, and don't you dare lie to me again. George's face crumpled. Tara, But Adrian cut him off. It's nothing for you to worry about, sis. Just a little financial hiccup. We've got it under control. I rounded on him, fury rising. Don't patronize me, Adrian. I heard enough to know you're in serious trouble. What have you done? The brothers exchanged a look of panic. Tara, please, George begged. We can't talk about this now. It's complicated. Complicated? I laughed bitterly. You're discussing illegal activities in our kitchen at midnight. I think I deserve some answers. Adrian stepped forward, his charm cranked up to maximum. Look, Tara, I know this seems bad, but I promise you, we're handling it. Just give us a little more time. I shook my head, disgusted. Time for what? To drag George deeper into whatever hole you've dug? To risk our family's future on one of your schemes? George reached for me, but I pulled away. Don't touch me. I want the truth now. All of it. The silence stretched between us, thick with tension. Finally, George spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. We owe money to some dangerous people, Tara. A lot of money, and if we don't pay soon... He trailed off, but the implication was clear. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet. How much? When George named the figure, I thought I might faint. How? I gasped. How is that even possible? Adrian stepped in. It started small, just a few bets here and there, but then we tried to win it back, and things escalated. I turned to George, tears stinging my eyes. You promised me you'd stopped gambling. You swore to me, George. He couldn't meet my gaze. I'm sorry, Tara. I never meant for it to go this far. As the full weight of their deception crashed over me, a horrible thought occurred to me. The pawn shop receipt, I said slowly. What did you sell? The guilty look that passed between them confirmed my worst fears. What did you sell? I repeated, my voice rising. George's answer shattered what was left of my world. Your grandmother's jewelry collection. In that moment, I knew our family would never be the same again. The revelation about my grandmother's jewelry was the final straw. The next morning, I confronted George in the kitchen, my voice trembling with barely contained rage. I want Adrian out of this house. Today. George's eyes widened. Tara, please. We can't just throw him out. He's family. Family? I spat. Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't lie and gamble away our future. Adrian chose that moment to saunter in, oblivious to the tension. Morning, folks. What's for breakfast? I whirled on him. Nothing. Pack your bags. You're leaving. Adrian's smirk faltered. Come on, sis. Don't be like that. Don't call me sis, I shouted, my control finally snapping. You've worn out your welcome. Get out. George stepped between us. Tara, calm down. We can work this out. Work what out? Ethan's small voice came from the doorway. We all froze, realizing he'd heard everything. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Ethan, honey, go back to your room. Mom and Dad need to talk. But Ethan stood his ground, his eyes darting between us. Are you fighting because of Uncle Adrian? The silence that followed was deafening. George knelt down, reaching for Ethan. Son, it's complicated, grown-up stuff. Ethan jerked away. Stop treating me like a baby. I know something's wrong. You're always arguing, and Dad's never home anymore. My heart broke seeing the pain in my son's eyes. I shot a venomous glare at George and Adrian. See what you've done? Your selfish actions are tearing this family apart. George looked stricken. Ethan, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Adrian, for once, seemed at a loss for words. I made a decision then and there. Ethan, go pack a bag. We're going to stay with Grandma for a while. What? George exclaimed. Tara, you can't just leave. I stood my ground. Watch me. I won't let you two drag us down with you. Ethan and I are leaving until you sort out this mess. As Ethan ran upstairs, George grabbed my arm. Please, don't do this. We can fix this together. I yanked my arm away. Fix it? How, George? By selling more of our belongings? By getting involved in something illegal? Adrian stepped forward. Tara, listen. I have a plan that could solve everything. No, I cut him off. I don't want to hear any more of your plans. They're what got us into this mess in the first place. George's face crumpled. What about our marriage, our family? I felt a twinge of guilt, but steeled myself. You should have thought about that before you lied to me, before you gambled away our savings and pawned my grandmother's jewelry. Ethan came back downstairs, dragging his backpack. His eyes were red-rimmed, but he looked determined. I took his hand. Come on, sweetie, let's go. As we headed for the door, George made one last plea. Tara, please, don't leave. I love you. I paused, my hand on the doorknob. Without turning around, I said, if you love us, you'll fix this. And when you do, maybe we can talk about coming home. With that, I walked out, Ethan's small hand in mine. As we drove away, I caught a glimpse of George and Adrian in the rearview mirror, standing in the doorway looking lost. My heart ached, but I knew I was doing the right thing. This separation might be the wake-up call George needed to break free from Adrian's influence and make things right. As we pulled up to my mother's house, Ethan looked up at me. Mom, are we going to be okay? I squeezed his hand, forcing a smile. We will be, sweetie. We will be. But as I knocked on my mother's door, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a long and painful journey. Whatever came next, I knew our family would never be the same again. 2 weeks at my mother's house had done little to soothe the ache in my heart. Ethan was withdrawn, spending most of his time glued to his video games. I'd barely spoken to George, aside from terse text messages about bills and Ethan's school schedule. It was a crisp autumn evening when I decided to swing by our house to pick up some more clothes for Ethan. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something odd. My car was missing. Heart racing, I fumbled for my keys and burst through the front door. George? I called out. No answer. The house was eerily quiet. I climbed the stairs, a sense of dread growing with each step. In our bedroom, dresser drawers hung open, clothes strewn about. George's closet was half empty. My hands shaking, I dialed George's number. Straight to voicemail. Where the hell are you? I hissed into the phone. Call me back. Now. As I paced the room, my eye caught on something poking out from under the bed. I knelt down and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a receipt from a pawn shop, dated just 2 days ago. The item description made my blood run cold. Antique silver tea set. My grandmother's tea set. The one she'd left me in her will. The one I'd been saving for Ethan's wedding day. Fury and panic warred inside me. I stormed down to the basement, praying I was wrong. But when I threw open the storage closet, my worst fears were confirmed. The carefully packed box containing my most precious family heirlooms was gone. I sank to the floor, my mind reeling. How could George do this? How far had he fallen? My phone buzzed, startling me. A text from an unknown number. Meet us at Riverside Park, 1 hour. Come alone or deal's off. My heart pounded. What deal? What had George and Adrian gotten themselves into? I knew I should call the police, but fear for George's safety held me back. Whatever trouble he was in, I couldn't bear the thought of him getting hurt, or worse. With trembling hands, I texted my mother, asking her to keep Ethan overnight. Then I got in my mother's borrowed car and drove to the park, my mind racing with possibilities, each worse than the last. The park was deserted when I arrived, shadows lengthening in the fading light. I clutched my phone, ready to dial 911 at a moment's notice. A figure emerged from behind a tree. George. He looked haggard, his eyes darting nervously. Tara, he breathed. You came. Where's my car, George? And my grandmother's tea set? I demanded. He flinched. I'm so sorry, we needed the money, but it's going to be okay now. Adrian's got a plan. A plan, I cut him off. Like all his other brilliant plans that got us into this mess? George grabbed my arms, his eyes pleading. You don't understand. These people, they're dangerous if we don't pay them back. A twig snapped behind me. I whirled around to see Adrian approaching, flanked by 2 burly men I didn't recognize. Well, Adrian drawled. The gang's all here. One of the men stepped forward, his hand ominously inside his jacket. You got our money? George paled. We're working on it. Just a little more time. The man's face hardened. Time's up. You know the consequences. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This wasn't just about gambling debts or pawned heirlooms. My family was in real danger. I stepped between George and the men, my voice steadier than I felt. How much? The man named a figure that made my stomach lurch. I took a deep breath, weighing our options. We could run, but for how long? We could go to the police, but would that put us in even more danger? Or I could make one last desperate move to save my family. I have a proposition for you, I said, meeting the man's cold gaze. One that will get you your money and keep my family safe. As all eyes turned to me, I silently prayed I wasn't making the biggest mistake of my life. My heart pounded as I crept up the attic stairs, following the muffled voices that had woken me in the dead of night. I'd returned home yesterday against my better judgment, after George had tearfully promised things would change. Now, as I reached the top of the stairs, I realized how foolish I'd been to believe him. The attic door was ajar, a sliver of light spilling out. I peered through the crack, my blood turning to ice at the sight before me. George and Adrian were hunched over a large box, my grandmother's antique collection spread out around them. They spoke in hushed, urgent tones. "This should cover at least half," Adrian muttered, holding up a delicate porcelain figurine. George nodded, his face a mask of guilt and desperation. "What about the rest? They won't wait much longer, Adrian." "We'll figure it out," Adrian assured him. "We always do." I couldn't contain myself any longer. I burst through the door, startling them both. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" They jumped apart, guilt written all over their faces. George looked like he might be sick. "Tara, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snarled, snatching the figurine from Adrian's hand. "How you're stealing my family heirlooms to pay off your gambling debts." Adrian stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "Now, Tara, let's not overreact. We're just borrowing them for a bit. Once we get back on our feet." "Shut up," I shouted, rounding on him. "This is all your fault. You show up here, drag George back into your schemes, and now you're robbing me blind." George reached for me, his eyes pleading. "Honey, please, we didn't have a choice. These people, they're dangerous if we don't pay them." "So this is your solution?" I gestured wildly at the scattered antiques. "Stealing from your own family?" A small voice from behind me made us all freeze. "Mom? Dad? What's going on?" Ethan stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with fear and confusion. The sight of him, so small and vulnerable, broke something inside me. I turned back to George and Adrian, my voice low and dangerous. "You have until morning to get these things back where they belong, and then you're both leaving, for good." George blanched. "Tara, please, where will we go?" "That's not my problem anymore," I said coldly. "You made your choice." As I ushered Ethan back to his room, trying to soothe his questions and fears, I heard frantic whispers from the attic. I knew in my gut that this wasn't over. The next morning, I woke early, determined to see George and Adrian out. But as I descended the stairs, an eerie silence greeted me. The house felt empty. With growing dread, I checked the attic. The box of antiques was gone. So were George and Adrian. I raced to our bedroom, yanking open drawers and closets. George's things were missing. On the bed lay a hastily scrawled note. "Tara, I'm so sorry. We had no choice. They threatened Eden. We'll make this right, I swear. Please forgive me. Love, George." My knees gave out and I sank to the floor, the note crumpling in my fist. How had it come to this? My husband, a thief in the night, running from dangerous men with my family's treasures. As the reality of our situation crashed over me, I heard Ethan stirring in his room. I had to be strong for him. I had to fix this mess George and Adrian had created. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone. It was time to make a call I'd been dreading, to my old friend on the police force. As I dialed, I steeled myself for what was to come. Our family was in danger, and I was the only one left to save it. My hands shook as I ended the call with Detective Martinez. He'd promised to put out an APB on George and Adrian, but his words rang in my ears. "Tara, you need to prepare yourself. This could get ugly." I sank onto the couch, my mind racing. How had our life come to this? My husband and his brother, fugitives with a box of stolen antiques, running from God knows who. A small hand touched my arm. Ethan stood there, his eyes wide with worry. "Mom, where's Dad?" I pulled him close, fighting back tears. "He had to go away for a little while, sweetie, but we're going to be okay." As if the universe was mocking me, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. With trembling fingers, I answered. "Mrs. Thompson?" A gruff voice sent chills down my spine. "We have your husband and his brother. If you want to see them alive again, bring $100,000 to the old warehouse on Pier 7. You have 3 hours." The line went dead. I stared at the phone in horror, my mind reeling. Where on earth was I supposed to get that kind of money? I called Detective Martinez back, relaying the message. He urged me not to go, to let the police handle it. But I knew in my gut that if I didn't show up, George and Adrian might not make it out alive. "Ethan, honey," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to go to Grandma's for a little while." After dropping Ethan off with my confused and worried mother, I drove to the bank. With a mixture of shame and desperation, I emptied our savings account and took out a second mortgage on the house. It still wasn't enough. With time ticking away, I made a decision that tore at my heart. I drove to the local pawn shop, the same one where George had sold my grandmother's tea set. Tears in my eyes, I handed over my wedding ring and the few remaining pieces of jewelry I had. The dealer's eyes widened as he counted out the cash. "Lady, whatever trouble you're in, I hope it's worth all this." I wasn't sure it was. With barely minutes to spare, I pulled up to the dilapidated warehouse. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the pier. My heart pounded as I clutched the duffel bag full of cash. "George?" I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Adrian?" A scuffling sound came from the back, and then they appeared. George and Adrian, bruised and disheveled, flanked by two menacing figures. "Tara!" George's voice cracked. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen." Adrian, for once, was silent, his usual bravado gone. One of the men stepped forward, his hand resting ominously on his hip. "You got our money?" I held up the bag. "It's all here. Now let them go." He smirked. "Slide it over. Nice and easy." I did as he said, my eyes never leaving George. As soon as the man had the bag, he nodded to his partner. They shoved George and Adrian towards me. "Pleasure doing business with you, Mrs. Thompson," the man sneered. "Let's hope your husband learns to pay his debts on time from now on." As they retreated into the shadows, I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. George stumbled towards me, reaching out. "Tara, I stepped back, my voice ice cold. Don't you dare touch me." Adrian piped up. "Sis, we can explain." "Shut up," I exploded, years of frustration and anger pouring out. "You've ruined everything. Our savings, our home, our family. All for what? Your pathetic gambling addiction?" George fell to his knees, sobbing. "Please, Tara, I'll do anything. Just don't leave me." I looked at him, this broken shell of the man I'd married, and felt nothing but a cold, hard resolve. "It's too late, George," I said quietly. "You've made your choice. Now I'm making mine." As I turned to walk away, leaving them both on that dark, lonely pier, I realized that this was just the beginning. The real fight to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my family's future was only just beginning. The morning after the warehouse confrontation, I sat at our kitchen table, a cup of cold coffee in front of me. George slept fitfully on the couch, having begged to come home. Adrian was gone, disappeared into the night like the coward he was. When George finally stirred, I was ready. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady and cold. He nodded, eyes bloodshot and full of shame. "Tara, I held up a hand, silencing him. "No, you listen. If you ever want to be part of this family again, this is how it's going to be." I laid out my terms. Adrian was never to set foot in our house again. George would attend Gamblers Anonymous and therapy. Every penny of our savings and my heirlooms would be accounted for and replaced. "And if you ever lie to me again," I finished, my voice breaking slightly, "we're done. No second chances." George nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I'll do anything, Tara. I swear." Just then, Ethan padded into the kitchen, his eyes widening at the sight of his father. "Dad? You're back?" The look on George's face, a mixture of love, shame, and fear, nearly broke my resolve. But I had to stay strong, for all of us. "Ethan, honey," I said gently, "Dad and I need to talk to you about some changes that are going to happen." Over the next few weeks, our lives shifted dramatically. George moved into the spare room, attending meetings every night. I took control of our finances, working extra hours to rebuild our savings. Ethan, my brave, perceptive boy, seemed to understand more than we gave him credit for. One night, as I tucked him in, he asked, "Mom, is Dad going to be okay?" I smoothed his hair, choosing my words carefully. "I hope so, sweetie. He's trying very hard to make things right." Ethan nodded solemnly. "I'm glad you made him stop hanging out with Uncle Adrian. He wasn't very nice." My heart swelled with pride and sadness. "You're right, honey. Sometimes we have to make tough choices to protect our family." As the months passed, I watched George struggle and grow. He threw himself into his recovery, taking on extra work to repay our debts. Slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild trust. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching Ethan play in the yard, George turned to me, his eyes clear and earnest. "Tara," he said softly, "I know I can never undo the hurt I've caused, but I want you to know how grateful I am for this second chance. You and Ethan, you're my whole world." I felt a flicker of the old warmth in my chest. I know, George. We're getting there, one day at a time. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over our little family, I realized something profound. The crisis that had nearly torn us apart had also given me strength I never knew I possessed. I had stood my ground, protected my son, and fought for our future. Ethan's laughter rang out as George chased him around the yard, their bond slowly mending. I smiled, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't known in months. Our family wasn't perfect. We had a long road ahead, full of challenges and hard work, but we were together, stronger for having weathered the storm. As I watched my two boys, I made a silent vow. No matter what life threw at us next, I would face it head on. I had found my voice, my strength, and I would never let anyone, not Adrian, not George, not anyone, threaten our happiness again. The old Tara, the one who had let others make decisions for her, was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who would fight tooth and nail for her family's well-being. And as the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, I felt a surge of hope for our future. We had been tested, nearly broken, but we had survived. Whatever came next, we would face it together, one day at a time.